We talk later. A quorum being present, the Committee on Homeland Security will come to order. The committee is meeting today for consideration of H.R. 3256, the Protecting and Securing Chemical Facilities from Terrorist Attack Act of 2019. The chair wishes to announce that to the extent practicable, it is my intention to roll votes in the manner respectful of members' schedule, and that the chair may recess the committee at any point. Without objection, so ordered. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. In just 10 months, the only federal program focusing on protecting U.S. chemical plants from terrorist attack will be shuttered unless Congress acts. In January, authorization for the Chemical Facility Anti-Terrorism Standards Program almost expired, and CFATS, as it is come to be known, was a day away from being terminated. Fortunately, in the 11th hour, Congress was granted a short window of time to get a long-term authorization bill to the President's desk. Given that a reauthorization of the CFATS program will have to go through at least 2 House committees before reaching the House floor and a Senate committee before it can be presented to the President, we do not have a moment to waste. For our part, this committee, which has a history with the CFATS program that dates back to 2006, takes its responsibility to strengthen it very seriously. Out of the gate in the 116th Congress, we held 2 oversight hearings in February and March to receive testimony from DHS and stakeholders on how the program is operating and how it can be improved. Then, under the leadership of the chairman of the Cybersecurity, Infrastructure Protection, and Innovation Subcommittee, Representative Richmond, the committee got to work. Over a 6-month period, the committee held close to 40 meetings with a diverse range of stakeholders, as well as our colleagues across the aisle and in the Senate, on how to improve this novel regulatory program in which high-risk chemical plant design their own security plans to meet risk-based performance measures. We sought out and spoke to everyone, from the American Petroleum Institute and Blue-Green Alliance to the Steelworkers and the National Association of Manufacturers. Throughout the process, we regularly conferred with DHS and the other congressional committees involved in reauthorizing the CFATS program. And when in May we got feedback from industry stakeholders, they needed more time to engage with us on the legislation, we delayed committee consideration, which brings us to today. We're here today to consider H.R. 3256, a 5-year reauthorization bill for the CFATS program. Thanks to Representative Richmond, H.R. 3256 does not simply authorize the CFATS program, but based on the committee's oversight findings, which include 5 separate government accountability reports, makes its improvements too. I am particularly proud of how the bill strengthens information sharing between facilities and with emergency responders who would be called upon to respond to an attack or wide-scale incident, and empower chemical workers to support a culture of security within their workplace. Representative Richmond will be going into greater detail on H.R. 3256, but for now, I'd like to take a moment to commend him for the bipartisan and thoughtful manner in which he oversaw the process. His willingness to engage with a diverse spectrum of stakeholders and slow down the process got the bill to a better place. I understand that some stakeholders continue to have reservations about H.R. 3256 and had hoped we would once again delay our markup. I too had hoped for additional time for the committee to negotiate a long-term CFATS reauthorization. That is why in January, I introduced a bill to extend the program for 2 years with Ranking Member Rogers and the leaders of the Energy and Commerce Committee, Representative Frank Pallone and Greg Walden. Unfortunately, for reasons that are unclear to me, the Senate insisted on limiting the extension to 16 months, dramatically reducing the amount of time we have to get a package across the finish line. Rest assured, we'll continue to engage with all CFAT stakeholders as this legislation progresses in the House in the hopes of bringing folks along. We also will continue working with the Energy and Commerce Committee to ensure that this counterterrorism program not only remains operational, but matures into a program that makes our communities, including those communities with high concentrations of chemical plants, more secure. Turning to today's bill, I'd like to express my appreciation to the ranking member and his staff for their willingness to engage with us as we kick off this legislative process with an eye to reaching bipartisan agreement on a final passage. With that, I yield to the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Rogers, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. CFATS is a critical program aimed at keeping dangerous chemicals out of the hands of terrorists. It's a successful program because it gives industry flexibility to secure their facilities based on each facility's unique risks and attributes. It is crucial that we do not let this program expire next year. I want to thank the chairman and his staff for working with us in a bipartisan manner on this bill. Unfortunately, despite the good work of staff on both sides, we could not come up with an agreement in time for today's markup. The rush to markup today before we have a bipartisan agreement in place is unfortunate. Before CFATS can move to the House for a vote, it must make its way through another committee. Last week was the first time that both sides had an opportunity to sit down with the Energy and Commerce Committee to discuss CFATS. In that meeting, several issues were raised that have yet to be resolved. Until there is bipartisan agreement with the Energy and Commerce Committee, there's no chance this bill will receive a bipartisan support it needs on the House floor to advance to the Senate. And we need a strong bipartisan vote for this bill because our Senate counterparts have expressed their opposition to the chairman's efforts. Beyond the jurisdictional issues, this bill would make several changes to policy that have me very concerned. First, the bill lowers the threshold for the risk assessment process DHS uses to help determine which facilities need to be regulated. Instead of considering the potential for loss of human life, the bill would require DHS to consider any consequence of attack. That could mean the department must waste time modeling the effect of a terrorist attack on butterfly migration or casino revenues. This change moves the CFATS program away from its nexus to terrorism. That's bad for the committee's jurisdiction over the program. And frankly, it's bad for Homeland Security. Second, the bill enlarges a whistleblower protection program in an agency that does not have the capacity or skills to administer such a program. It also authorizes employees to sue employers for certain violations of the Act. According to DHS, since it first started documenting whistleblower complaints in 2014, it has received a total of less than 10 such complaints. In each of these complaints, there have been no reports of retaliation taken against the employee. This provision appears to be a solution in search of a problem. Finally, the bill mandates union consultation and creates a chemical security advisory committee populated with environmentalists and community activists that have little, if any, understanding of the complexities of chemical security. For these reasons, many stakeholders that supported CFAT's past authorizations cannot support it today. However, I do believe that with some more time and effort, we could come to a bipartisan agreement that includes our counterparts on the Energy and Commerce Committee. I look forward to continuing to work with the chairman on this bill with the goal of bringing strong bipartisan product to the House floor. And thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Rogers. Other members of the committee are reminded that opening statements may be submitted for the record. By agreement between the chair and ranking member, the committee, by unanimous consent, shall have an amendment roster today.
Reserving the right to object, and I will not object, would the chair please explain our agreement regarding the amendment roster? I yield to the chairman.
I thank the gentleman and all the committee members for agreeing to the use of an amendment roster. We've agreed that the bill will be open to amendment at any point and that we will take up amendments in the order listed on the roster. The chair will allow members to offer amendments listed on the roster out of order to the extent practicable and in a manner not prohibited by House or committee rules. Amendments not listed on the roster may be considered at the conclusion of consideration of the roster.
I thank the chair for this explanation and withdraw my reservation.
I now call up H.R. 3256, the Protecting and Securing Chemical Facilities from Terrorist Attacks Act of 2019, and discharge the Subcommittee on Cybersecurity, Infrastructure Protection, and Innovation. The bill was circulated in advance and printed copies are available. The clerk shall designate the bill.
H.R. 3256, the Protecting and Security Chemical Facilities from Terrorist Attacks Act of 2019.
Without objection, the first reading is dispensed with, and the bill is considered read and open to amendments at any point. An amendment in the nature of a substitute has been submitted by the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Richmond. Does the gentleman wish to offer the amendment?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I have an amendment in the nature of a substitute listed on the roster and ask for its consideration at this time.
The clerk shall report the amendment.
Amendment in nature of a substitute to H.R. 3256, offered by Mr. Richmond of Louisiana.
Without objection, the reading is dispensed with, and the amendment in the nature of a substitute shall be considered base text for purposes of amendment. The amendment in the nature of a substitute was noticed to committee members in compliance with committee rules. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Louisiana for 5 minutes to explain the amendment in the nature of the substitute.
Mr. Chairman, former Speaker Tip O'Neill once said all politics is local. In my case, Chemical Facility Anti-Terrorism Standards Program, a national security program. To my district, it's a local security program. My home state of Louisiana is home to over 20 CFATS facilities, and my constituents benefit directly from the security benefits of the CFATS program that the CFATS program provides every day. A lapse in this program's authorization could jeopardize both public safety and my state's economy. That is why I'm committed to getting H.R. 3256 across the finish line before the current authorization for CFATS expires in April. As we work on that today, I would like to recognize the efforts of my colleagues in the minority have made to reach a bipartisan agreement on a long-term CFATS reauthorization package. Like the full committee chairman and ranking member, I am confident that we will ultimately reach a bipartisan agreement on this bill. That said, acting now is critical to avoiding a lapse in the authorization of the CFATS program, and I thank Chairman Thompson for working with me to make CFATS reauthorization a top priority of the committee. H.R. 3256 is the product of rigorous oversight. The committee has engaged with over 40 stakeholders and the Department of Homeland Security to make this important national security program better. For example, when the program nearly expired earlier this year, we heard from stakeholders across the board about how important stability was. We also heard repeatedly that one of the biggest benefits of the previous authorization was the stability that its multi-year term gave to everyone with a stake in the program. In response, H.R. 3256 authorizes CFATS for 5 years, which will give DHS time for the program to continue developing and for regulated facilities to make strategic security investments. One of the key features of H.R. 3256 is that it directly addresses GAO findings that first responders aren't consistently getting the information they need to respond safely and effectively to incidents at chemical facilities. It also addresses the committee's oversight findings that some facilities are not including employees in developing the site security plans the way Congress directed through language clarifying the employee engagement requirements. Toward that end, I have a letter of support from the United Steelworkers, and I ask unanimous consent to insert it into the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
The Steelworkers letter underscores the importance of what we are doing here today by acknowledging that the employee and whistleblower protection provisions in the 2014 Act, quote, have not played out as intended with DHS and in the field, unquote. My amendment in the nature of a substitute makes important refinements to the text of H.R. 3256 and includes language recommended by some of my colleagues on issues related to improving the cybersecurity of chemical facilities, ensuring first responders are prepared to respond to incidents at chemical facilities, and assessing whether CFATS adequately considers the potential impact of chemical incidents on surrounding communities. I understand that Representatives Langevin, Jackson, Lee, and Green may speak on those provisions, but I wanted to take this opportunity to thank them for working with me to make H.R. 3256 better. As I close, I remain committed to working with the minority on this committee on H.R. 3256 as we engage with our colleagues on energy and commerce in the Senate. With that, I urge my colleagues to support the ANS and underlying bill, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Is there any further discussion on the amendment in the nature of a substitute? There being no further discussion and no amendment listed on the roster, does any member wish to offer an amendment at this time? There being no amendments, the question now occurs on agreeing to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 3256. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying no.
No.
In the opinion of the chairs, the ayes have it, and the amendment in the nature of a substitute is agreed to. The question now occurs on reporting H.R. 3256 as amended to the House with a favorable recommendation. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All those opposed signify by saying no.
No.
In the opinion of the chairs, the ayes have it, and the motion is agreed to. A recorded vote has been requested. Is there a sufficient second for a recording vote, which has had a sufficient number having requested a recorded vote is ordered? The clerk will now call the roll.
Ms. Jackson Lee. Ms. Jackson Lee. Mr. Langevin. Mr. Langevin. Mr. Richmond. Mr. Richmond votes aye. Mr. Payne. Mr. Payne votes aye. Ms. Rice. Ms. Rice votes aye. Mr. Correa. Mr. Correa votes aye. Ms. Torres Small. Ms. Torres Small votes aye. Mr. Rose. Mr. Rose votes aye. Ms. Underwood. Ms. Underwood votes aye. Ms. Slotkin. Ms. Slotkin votes aye. Mr. Cleaver. Mr. Cleaver. Mr. Green of Texas. Mr. Green of Texas. Ms. Clark. Ms. Clark votes aye. Ms. Titus. Ms. Titus votes aye. Mrs. Watson Coleman. Mrs. Watson Coleman votes aye. Ms. Berrigan. Ms. Berrigan votes aye. Mrs. Demings. Mrs. Demings votes aye. Mr. Rogers.
No.
Mr. Rogers votes no. Mr. King. No. Mr. King votes no. Mr. McCall. No. Mr. McCall votes no. Mr. Katko. Mr. Katko votes no. Mr. Ratcliffe. Mr. Ratcliffe votes no. Mr. Walker. Mr. Walker votes no. Mr. Higgins. Mr. Higgins votes no. Mrs. Lesko. Mrs. Lesko votes no. Mr. Green of Tennessee. Mr. Green of Tennessee votes no. Mr. Taylor. Mr. Taylor votes no. Mr. Joyce. Mr. Joyce. Mr. Crenshaw. Mr. Crenshaw votes no. Mr. Guess. Mr. Guess votes no. Ms. Jackson Lee. Ms. Jackson Lee. Mr. Langevin. Mr. Langevin. Mr. Cleaver. Mr. Cleaver. Mr. Green of Texas. Mr. Green of Texas. Mr. Joyce. Mr. Joyce.
How am I recorded?
The chairman is not recorded.
Chair votes aye.
Mr. Thompson votes aye.
The clerk will report the vote.
On this vote, the ayes are 14 and the noes are 12.
The ayes have it, and the committee agrees to consider the measure without objection. The motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Without objection, the motion this concludes the consideration of the bills noticed by the committee today.
Mr. Chairman, pursuant to Rule...
Young lady from New York.
Mr. Chairman, pursuant to Rule 22, Clause 1 of the Rules of the House, I move that the committee authorize the chairman to offer such motions as may be necessary in the House to go to conference with the Senate on the bills ordered reported by this committee today or on similar Senate bills.
Without objection, the motion is agreed to.
Mr. Chairman, pursuant to House Rule 11, Clause 2L, I ask the members have 2 calendar days to file with the clerk of the committee supplemental, additional, or minority views on each of the bills ordered reported by the committee today.
Without objection, so ordered. There being no further business to transact, the committee stands adjourned.